That was a very short break. That was a very short break. Everybody, thanks for taking your seats. We're going to jump right back in. Thanks so much. It's a little bit painful to have to bring the conversations to a close. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for taking your seats. So the last couple of panels give us a chance to move forward into the practical realm. I'm Margaret Crome. I'm with Michael Fields Agricultural Institute. And the next couple of panels are going to be looking at, so we've heard about why phosphorus matters. We've heard about strategies. We've heard about the regulatory framework. So what does it look like on the ground? That's what the next 4 panelists are going to be sharing with us. And our third panelist will be right here shortly. I'm going to just tell you introduce folks, but just first say that this is a panel that highlights the experience of several members of the regulated community who will be describing the adaptive management and water quality trading strategies in their communities. What's the reality of what it looks like on the ground for them? And so I'm just going to introduce our really excellent panelists right now. And I'm going to come back to Chris in a minute, as he's not quite back yet. Starting with Darrell Smith, a Watershed Program Manager for the Oconomowoc Watershed Protection Program, and John Koepke, owner and farmer of Koepke Farms Incorporated, also in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. They will provide a case study example of phosphorus management using the adaptive management compliance option. Darrell guides the City of Oconomowoc's adaptive management program to reach compliance with water quality standards in the Oconomowoc River. The program started in 2015. It focuses on watershed-wide phosphorus reduction strategies, including land management practices, lake improvements, and stream restoration. John Koepke is a 5th-generation farmer and owner at Koepke Farms. He's a founding member of Farmers for Lake Country, a farmer-led organization that advocates for economically viable, best management practices to improve soil health and help preserve and protect our lakes and streams. John and Koepke Farms have adopted a completely no-till system and utilize conservation practices such as contour strip cropping, diversified crop rotation, nutrient management, and cover crops. To his right, as you are watching, is the second water quality case study. And this is, we're going to be focusing on the experience down in Janesville. Chris Murphy, a conservation specialist for Rock County Land Conservation Department, and David Botts, a utility director with the Public Works Department for the City of Janesville, will provide a case study example of phosphorus management using the water quality trading compliance option. So, Chris, as the conservation specialist with Rock County Land Conservation Department, has designed and implemented water quality trading plans for the cities of Beloit and Janesville. He's also implemented the portion of the Yahara Winds Adaptive Management Plan located in Rock County. Chris has 26 years of land conservation and water quality improvement experience from past employment with USDA NRCS Natural Resource Conservation Service in Montana and land conservation departments in Wisconsin. David Botts has been working for the City of Janesville since 2012. Registered professional engineer in the state of Wisconsin. He most recently served as the Director of Public Works for the City of Beloit for 13 years, during which time his responsibilities included management of the Beloit water and wastewater utilities. Prior to serving there as Beloit's Public Works Director, Dave spent 7 years in the city's engineering department, also has 10 years experience as a practicing engineer in the private sector. So we have some real practical, on-the-ground, gritty experience. So we're going to just jump right in, if you don't mind, Darrell, coming up, taking over. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Margaret. Okay, my name is Darrell Smith with the City of Oconomowoc, hopefully giving you a few tidbits from our stories from the road. We're about 7.5 years into an adaptive management program, so I thought I'd share some updates, some wins, some challenges, and give you a little sense of what's happening on the ground. The City of Oconomowoc Adaptive Management Program, this watershed is in southeast Wisconsin, and it has a number of lakes in the sort of lower third of the watershed. The water flows diagonally from northeast to southwest, where the river merges with the Rock River. And in 2015, the city wrote an adaptive management plan that was approved by the Wisconsin DNR. And that program established targets, modeled pound reduction of phosphorus that we need to meet at 5-year intervals, and with an ultimate target of 0.075 milligrams per liter where the Oconomowoc River meets the Rock River. The reason why the city opted for this pathway, we heard recently, just in the previous presentation, there can be a cost reduction, so there was an estimated savings by approaching it in this way, but also because city residents, so the red star is where the wastewater treatment plant is, and if all the upgrades were done just at the wastewater treatment plant, the water quality in the lake system just north and east of there, where the majority of residents live, that would not be improved, and the residents wouldn't experience that benefit. So the idea is that from a quality of life standpoint, the quality of the environment and the community, it made sense to invest upstream and to go all the way up to the northeast section and all the way down to where it merges with the Rock River. So that point of compliance there is at the confluence. The 2015 status in terms of a water quality phosphorus concentration was 0.091 milligrams per liter, and the criteria for compliance, 0.075. Where we stand right now, so I'll just cut right to the chase, from this year's data, as a median reading of twice weekly readings at that point from May to October, we stand at 0.078, which seems like we've made some really good progress, which we're excited about and happy to share. However, we're also conscious that it's 1 year, and some years we can look like heroes, and other years it looks like we're not that successful. A lot depends on precipitation. However, we were above average for the precipitation annually this year, so we're excited that we got these numbers from this year. We got about 4 inches above average. We averaged 36 inches right there at the plant. The red star here is actually our point of compliance. It's just slightly upstream from the confluence. That's not the treatment plant in this photo. This shows the 3 5-year intervals and the pound reductions we need on an annual basis at the end of each of those 3 5-year intervals. So you can see it's front-loaded in the first 5 years, and then additional in the next 5-year period, and so forth. Ultimate goal is to reduce 9,750 pounds of annual load reduction, and this is done, and our progress is modeled using SNAP+. However, compliance and adaptive management is ultimately the quality of the water right at the confluence. So even if the model tells us we've met our goals and the water doesn't show that we've done that, then we haven't met our compliance. So it's actually, we have to show progress, and if we're not demonstrating ample progress, the adaptive management program can be pulled and be reverted to other methods to get there. So. Oh, actually, just going back to that, ooh, sweet, this works. You'll notice there are different categories. So it's not just land management activities, which would be the agricultural practices. We're also working in stream banks and lake improvement projects. So it's actually multiple layers, and the wastewater treatment plant does not get off the hook. There are improvements we have to make there as well, and much of that has already been done. Also to cut to the chase, where we trended this year is around 4,000 pounds of load reduction annually. So we're well on our way, but again, we need to monitor the water quality and keep progressing with projects along the way. To give you some ideas about what actual projects are on the ground, this is one of the first ones we did, one of the largest. It's about a 100-acre area that was converted from annual cropland to prairie. So we have a beautiful perennial system that has grown up here. This field is actually like a bowl shape that drains to a central wetland, and then that had a small little output right into the lower Oconomowoc River. So the idea here was to put it into perennial cover that prevented sheet flow. And also there was a berm placed across the wetland that actually helps to slow the movement of water. So it's a combination of two main practices. The NRCS participated significantly, and I would say that the NRCS and other grant-making agencies have been really helpful for the city because it's amplified our investment, basically doubling what the city has invested. It's essentially been matched almost one-to-one if you look at everything in its entirety from grant-making organizations and also other partner organizations in the area working towards the same goals. You can see on the bottom right the image of the prairie today. The thing I'd say about this is it's not our goal to necessarily take cropland out of annual production. We're not trying to put farmers out of business. And in fact, in doing this, we had a couple of eyebrows raised. And so the bulk of what we're trying to do is to change the practices that are happening on the land, keep the land in agricultural production, but to add buffers, use no-till, cover crops, and other practices that John's participating in as one of many farmers in the area. This is an example of a buffer system very close to that prairie. This is a buffer that was just recently planted the previous fall. So you can see how it wasn't perfectly working yet. You can see that channelized flow going through the buffer. The nice thing is that it improved over time, but it gives you an idea that, okay, that cropland in the back is an area of concern. We're able to put in a nice sized buffer. We were able to follow the water patterns, observe it over a couple of years, and install a buffer designed to mitigate that and also allow the agricultural practices to continue. This is how the buffer looked just 2 years later. I wish it was even bigger. I can't say that no water, no concentrated flow gets through, but it is improving. Additionally, working in streams, we just completed a stream remeandering. You have to say that slowly, I guess. So this is Mason Creek, which feeds North Lake, which is impaired for total phosphorus. And basically, we took a 1,600 line-foot section of it and restored it closer to its historical path. But more important than just the curves are how it's protected and also tapered. So the image at the bottom is just sort of a schematic of showing originally it had very steeply tapered banks, incised banks, which meant that it did not filter water well and provided a lot of opportunity for scouring. So by tapering the banks and integrating it into the floodplain, which we also heard about earlier today, that trying to maximize wetland hydrology and those other filtering forces, this is one way to do it. This is an aerial shot from just this fall in November. It's not cheap. I would find that this would be one of the more expensive ways on a per pound reduction basis. However, it should last a long time if properly constructed. It's not something that annually can be removed from the landscape if a practice changes on an agricultural field. In terms of on-field practices, we have a producer-led watershed group. Really appreciate the DATCAP funding that's been going to our group and to many groups in the area. John was one of the starting members of our group, and we've been able to implement a number of practices. One of the ones that's gotten us some notoriety in the area is that we've been doing some aerial seeding of cover crops, first by helicopter, although now we're experimenting more with drone work, which is a little more, you can take a much more fine-tooth comb towards the application of seed, more accurate. However, it also is a little slower, so advantages and disadvantages. What we're trying to do here is to get the seed on earlier in the season, in this case on soybeans before leaf drop occurs so that the leaves fall on top of the germinating seed or provide a little bit of a good moisture environment for the seed to germinate. And then it has longer to establish, and then in the following year, those roots are better established and the top growth comes back more quickly. The downside is some variability from aerial application, both in terms of targeting in it if you're using a pilot, but also openness to some pest issues, whether it's earthworms or slugs, or even maybe some disease damage. We think we had some of that this year with a really wet period that happened soon after aerial application. You can't bank on that. So drilling is still a more secure way of getting seed to soil contact, but you lose maybe 4 to 6 weeks of growth time by doing that. Farmers for Lake Country has been critical to us expanding the acreage under cover crops. You can see 2016, the beginning of Farmers for Lake Country and dramatic increase of cover crops, both applied by air and by drilling. So we're excited about that. That peer-to-peer relationship is really important in terms of just sharing knowledge, providing encouragement, some camaraderie that these are practices that are working, and what are the ways that we can get there together and learn from each other. And then even more innovative work, I believe, planting green, which means that you're allowing that cover crop to grow much taller even before you terminate it. That provides green cover, deeper root system in the May and June time period when sheet flow is a significant concern. And then after it's terminated, that vegetation falls over and provides surface cover as the new crop is growing, the cash crop is growing, and hasn't fully canopied across the rows. So really nice protection and hopefully some phosphorus benefits. So that's essentially, I believe that's it. I'm gonna turn it over to John. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? All right, wonderful. So I'm going to take you on a very boots on the ground tour of my farm or my family's farm, I should say, and the practices that we implement to work along with Farmers for Lake Country and to be better stewards to our community. I promise that we, even though we're going to take a boots on the ground tour here, that there's enough crop residue and cover crops and whatnot out there that you won't even get your shoes dirty, okay? So a little bit about us. We are a dairy farm in Waukesha County, Wisconsin. We milk about 350 cows, raise heifers, farm about 1,200 acres of cropland, of which about a third of which is sold as cash crops, and the rest fed to our dairy herd. You get from the slide, we're a fairly diverse farm trying to fit into our local community as best we can. We have a number of current conservation practices that we use. We utilize a nutrient management plan on every last acre. We no-till every last acre, with some land having not been tilled since 1986. We utilize cover crops where practical, which we hope is just about everywhere. Contour planting, we maintain grass waterways, try to keep ground cover on at all time, monitor the results, and try to live up to the mantra that every day is Earth Day when you make your living off the land. So this is the original Koepke homestead. This is in the Oconomowoc River watershed. The rest of our farm is just north of the watershed. There's 110 acres here that my dad, myself, and my uncles inherited from some family members in 2009. It borders the city of Oconomowoc. It is protected under conservation easement. And so our hope and goal is that it will be ag land long after we are gone, okay? So our top priority is to treat it as best we can, and we are active participants with Farmers for Lake Country. I should add in here too that a little bit of what drives our conservation efforts. I've had very forward-thinking grandparents, forward-thinking parents, and in 10th grade, in order to get out of taking a third year of foreign language, I took an environmental science class, okay? And in there, I had a very passionate science teacher who made us read Sand County Almanac, all right? And one of the lines that stuck, where's Leopold guy? Is he still here? One of the lines that stuck was that we as conservationists, oftentimes in places like this, we're ready to charge at windmills whenever we're in the conservation hall. But when we get to the back 40, we end up denying we even own the lands to charge at the windmills, okay? So we try to walk our talk as best we can. And so our farm is seeded to a 3-year crop rotation of corn, soybeans, wheat, and red clover. We managed to squish 4 crops into 3 years and keep living roots in the ground, hopefully year-round throughout the crop rotation. This is planting corn in early May into a red clover cover. And you can see we're trying to aim for good soil health. You see the well aggregated clod there that looks like nice rich chocolate cake with the earthworm hanging out. That's what we aim for, only we hope not to disturb any of the soil. We try to walk our talk right to the end, okay? And that means that living cover crop, the red clover, that provided about half of the nitrogen fertilizer for our corn crop during the year, as well as holding the soil in place and hopefully reducing pea losses, etc. We get a nice crop of corn. The field behind under the tractor there, you can't see it, but it's been aerial seeded to a mix of wheat and rye that we had applied with the helicopter. We plant the following spring soybeans into that living cover and terminate the cover. And then again, after or either before harvest into the soybeans here, we will seed wheat, the third crop in our crop rotation, which will also serve as the wintertime cover. This was seeded with a helicopter. The other option is we get the soybeans harvested and we plant the wheat, hopefully within the same day. And then in early spring, one of us will go out with an ATV and seed red clover across the winter wheat when the wheat is short, like it looks like your lawn. And then after harvest, you can see there's a little bit of green under there. A lot of that is red clover that will again provide that living root bridge throughout the seasons. And by mid-September, I usually have a really nice crop of hay. Okay, so the cover crop again becomes a forage crop that I can utilize on my dairy as well as hold the soil in place. It's hard to describe a crop rotation because eventually you're describing a whole circle. So please imagine that the following spring we'll be back with the corn planter again planting into this. So we've learned throughout our experiences it's important to document your successes, whether it's with Farmers for Lake Country or as individual producers. You see two photos up here. These were taken about 3/8 of a mile apart on the same day, about 2 minutes apart. The photo stamp on my phone is about 2 minutes apart. The field that you see on the left is planted to corn, and it was done in a conventional tillage system. And you can see it's a brown soupy mess out there, okay? The field on the right, planted to the same crop. The only difference is that field was no-till planted. I took these on a Sunday morning, on a rainy Sunday morning when my kids didn't want to go to church. And so I drove around and looked at what kind of rainfall we got. I could have walked out there with my Sunday shoes on and not gotten them muddy. The other field, not so much. So it's important to document our successes as we go along. Along the lines of documenting successes, prior to our experiences with Farmers for Lake Country, our farm was for 4 years involved with the Discovery Farms program. I want to share a little bit of data with you that was done about 15 years ago that maybe will help explain to you a little bit why the pivot to cover crops and what some of the things we do. We were doing all no-till at this point, and if I can make the pointer work on here, our farm is SE1. This is sediment loss during the periods of our dates on here are 2006, 2007, and 2008. And we were pretty proud of ourselves as how we managed sediment loss during that time frame. 2008 was a tricky year in our neighborhood. We got an exceptional amount of rainfall. I think it was like something like 14 to 18 inches in May and June, and it was the only time frame since its building that I-94 was closed between Milwaukee and Madison. So we did have heavy rainfall during that time, yet our sediment losses were minimal. Nitrogen losses, we're also, if you look at SE1, we're also well below average, with the exception of 2008. Again, those heavy rains in the field we were monitoring this in was planted to corn, and there had been nitrogen application right before all the flooding. So we did get some nitrogen loss. Phosphorus loss was another story. You can see 2008, we had a significant amount of phosphorus loss. So as previous speakers have said, there's no silver bullet here. There's no way to instantly solve phosphorus loss with doing good soil conservation practices that are going to help in other matters. I've had it suggested to me, looking at this chart, well, maybe you should go back to doing some tillage to try to get phosphorus down lower into the soil profile, et cetera. To me, that's a little bit like if I had smoked for 20 years and I go back to my doctor and he tells me, wow, it's really great you quit smoking, but you put on 30 pounds. Maybe you should go back to burning half a pack a day to take the weight off, okay? It's not the sharpest way to do things. And so consequently, we've tried to pivot, looked at our management system as to what we can do better, et cetera. We've tried to increase soil cover in vulnerable timeframes, and for us, the most vulnerable timeframe is May and June. So that means getting more cover crops out on the land. We've reduced the intensity of manure applications. We try to put manure on our dairy land in smaller increments throughout the crop rotation versus maybe just a large chunk before corn, okay? We are trying to avoid what we in agriculture call the moron principle. Is anybody in here familiar with the moron principle? Okay, the moron principle is I applied some fertilizer, it worked really well, so I put some more on, right? Okay. We have to realize that baseline in any environment isn't 0.0. There is always a little bit of loss somewhere along the line. The Grand Canyon, that didn't form by man, okay? There was plenty of erosion, probably some phosphorus loss when all of that happened. Lewis and Clark, Meriwether Lewis talked about when they headed up the Missouri River, when they went from the Mississippi to the Missouri, he wrote in his diary about how the water in the river changed, and it went from blue to brown. And guess what? Upstream in the Missouri River, agriculture wasn't up there yet turning the prairie sods over yet. It was still native country. So we need to continue to search for solutions. That's how we have to keep moving ahead. I've got 1 minute left here, so I am going to skip ahead real closely. We talked about rules and what the appropriate rules should be going forward, etc. Let's go back to Leopold here. He had three ways to seek compliance in the conservation world. The first way was rules. He felt rules seldom worked because people were always trying to get around them. They didn't believe in what was going on, etc. Second way was financial incentives. In regards to financial incentives, he felt that they worked better, but there was always the challenge of where's the money going to come from? Is it sustainable, etc. His best way to get compliance was if the landowner simply believed in what he was doing. And I think that's the point that we need to get to with most everybody. This is somebody that he followed all the rules, and this happened right up the street from me in the end of May this year. We had 2 inches of rain and a bunch of hail in about 20 minutes. And you can see that what happened. There's a lot of chocolate milk, and there's a lot of crop residue, and there's even seed in the ditch from the crop that had washed out. A field just up the street a little bit further had been no-till planted into green cover. You don't see any soil loss there, do you? Hopefully there's no phosphorus loss as well. Collaboration together makes us stronger. And the last thing I'm going to say is, as far as getting to trying to reach compliance and reach all groups, this is some of our watershed group. And there are some real rock stars out here. There are people from their 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, etc. there. If these were musicians, this guy here, he's B.B. King, all right? He was cool long before cool existed, all right? We've got Emmylou Harris here, maybe Sheryl Crow, and this guy here, he's kind of Chris Stapleton. He's about 30, all right? But here's the deal. We talked before about why, where, etc. This guy here has to convey to the young guy here the why. That's the only way conservation is going to take place and go forward, is if older generations express why we need to take care of the natural resources to the younger generation. And this guy here, Chris Stapleton, he's got to figure out the how, all right? It's been said you can't teach old dogs new tricks. The young dog's got to take the lead and figure out how to get the how done. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, both Darrell and John. So I'm going to ask you all just one clarifying question here, and it gets to a point that came up earlier today, having to do with, I guess we'll say accountability. I've known you, John, for maybe close to 20 years, and I think anybody in the room would agree probably you're just impeccably committed and honest, but not everybody is. Not everybody, if they write a nutrient management plan at all, will then implement it, will do as they say that they will do. Maybe there's an inconvenience, maybe their kids aren't going to cooperate, maybe there's some challenges. In your system, is there a mechanism for enforcement, for saying, you made this commitment, here are the consequences for failing to move it forward?
I'll answer too. But
Okay, I mean, coming from my standpoint, I only have the carrot. I don't have a stick. The carrot I have is sweetened by some good solid dollars coming from the city and other grant-making organizations. So I'm really appreciative of that. I'm not just appealing to goodwill, but I do not have a stick. However, I can check on compliance from something that we fund.
I'm going to share a real quick story, and we need to get on to the other presenters, but I did share 2 slides with the muddy field that was planted on the, with the Sunday morning rainfall. There was some pretty significant erosion on the other side of that field, and I happened to send a picture via email to somebody with kind of a nasty note about who the heck did this, and this flows into a tributary of the river, and et cetera. That email, unfortunately, got passed along. And unfortunately, it found its way to the landowner. And yeah, we exchanged words, and he called me a dirty, rotten SOB, etc. The next spring, that field got no-till planted. So somebody got the message somewhere, and compliance showed up. So sometimes things work out in strange ways, okay?
Great, thank you very much. So Chris, you're up next, then David.
All right, thank you. Thank you for inviting us to talk today. As you may notice, I was at the same outdoor party that Matt was at, so my voice is going to sound a little strange today here. But questions. Do we have the tools? Does there need to be a different approach? How do we move forward? Those are 3 things that I learned or kind of picked up out of the presentations before here. So as we get into ours here, I hope by the end of our presentation, you'll be able to walk away with some of those answers. Okay? The Janesville Water Quality Trading Plan, we formed a partnership in 2021, and the whole idea is that the city is paying agricultural producers to reduce the amount of phosphorus coming off their property, okay? The city of Janesville's role is to determine the amount of required phosphorus reduction credits, review and approve the practices, assemble training plan and present to the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and then enter into the agreements with the landowners and make the payments for the installation and maintenance of those practices.
Okay, so we had to identify how much phosphorus poundage we needed to reduce. So we conducted a study to determine that, found out we need a little bit under 1,600 pounds to have reduced in our offset to be compliant with our new TDL permit that went into effect on April 1st of 22, down to 0.1 milligrams per liter of discharge. Or we have a pound allowance for each month, and so we have to monitor it on a monthly basis. So what we did, we hired a consultant. He went through and identified, how many pounds we need to be reduced. And then we used the guidance document set up by the DNR. Matt's group was very helpful in helping us, design the plan. We used what Rock County had been using with the city of Beloit and came up with a plan that the DNR approved last year. And then we had to create the agreements with the property owners in order for those guys to have a commitment on how much or what the activities they were going to do to reduce the phosphorus runoff. And then Chris with Rock County did all the development of the amount of poundage that each implementation of a practice would do on their properties in order for us to gain enough pounds for the whole plan. Once we created this agreement, then Chris took these agreements to the property owners and discussed it with those guys, trying to come up with make sure they had an agreement with it. There's always discussion on, okay, how much we're going to get paid for these. And so, we had to negotiate back and forth to come up with a reasonable amount that we were going to pay for these practices. And then we became consistent with all the practices, because we had one guy say, I want this much for this one, and another guy say, I want this much. And so we made basically a commitment to paying everybody the same, because we know all those guys get together in the morning for coffee and would discuss it. And so we would end up paying them all the same anyway. So we started out that way. And we got so far we've got about 15 agreements to get signed in order to meet this amount of poundage that we need to have. We've got 7 of them currently under contract, and then we'll get the rest of them, going for the rest of this year. We get that agreement, we get it recorded with the county, and we have that signed agreement, send it back to the property owner, and then my job is to make sure we write them checks. And so we have to make sure that the payments go forward to them, and so those guys can proceed with managing their program that they're going to do.
Okay, our role in this is kind of like the middle person. So we identify the projects and the landowners that are out, want to participate in the plan. We provide the design assistance and then certify the practices. And then we'll do the calculations that determine the amount of phosphorus that's reduced. And then we also are responsible for going out and doing the inspections and providing an annual report. So the question about being accountable there is hopefully answered right there, in that case there. The types of projects we identified, barnyards, gully erosion, those are the 2 major phosphorus sources that we can find that you get your biggest bang for your buck. Any kind of sheet and rill erosion coming off highly erodible cropland. We've got the best management practices that we identified. Dave mentioned that there's rates for each of these. So the filter strips, contour strips, grass waterways, those are all being paid at a certain rate. And that's for a 10-year period. So they're getting an annual payment for those 10 years, and they can harvest the forage off of that, okay? To my right is a picture there where we took some highly erodible cropland, small areas of cropland out of production and put it into perennial forage. And that's paid at a different rate than the others. Other practices that would qualify, stream bank erosion practices. Barnyard runoff, mentioned it earlier, roof gutters, diversions. We're working with an individual to put in a phosphorus system that's going to remove the phosphorus as it comes off of the barnyard there. How we calculate the phosphorus reduction, SNAP Plus was mentioned earlier. Barney for the barnyard practices. USDA NRCS has a gully erosion worksheet that's been modified. Kyle Minks, where are you? Take a bow. Actual samples taken during runoff events. You know, you can get out there, collect those samples, send them to the lab, and then we've got an accurate estimate of what's going on out there. And then in the cases of the stream banks, we'll sample the soil. I talked about the annual inspections and reports. Couple forms there. One is the DNR form that actually certifies that that's what's going on out there, quantifies it, and I sign off on it, send it to Dave. Dave sends it off to the DNR, and that's the paperwork that's involved. I really like this slide because I think it's very, very important that we talk about the partnerships that can be involved in this process. I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit here, but I think a great example of this is the Yahara Winds. Kim, you back there? Great. These folks have really come together to utilize not only the federal, state, and local cost share programs that have been talked about here, but also the farmers group. And they really need to be recognized. I thought I saw a representative from Clean Lakes Alliance. Are you still around? Yes, sir, there you are. Thank you. Thank you for your participation in that program. That's excellent. They've been able to come together and work as a partnership and utilize different practices to address those three questions that I mentioned before. Why I believe this is a blueprint for success. And I need to change this slide because I know it's a blueprint for success. I don't believe it anymore. I know it is. This process, what I got there? It develops the partnerships and maximizes the resources. I want to use the example of maximizing resources. One of the practices that I didn't have up there was grazing systems. We can take a annual cropland, turn it into a grazing system using USDA and NRCS EQIP dollars, land and water resource money from DADCAP, and then have the city come in and pay a portion of that project as well. Fencing, seeding, water development, all of that. So these projects can be done, and it comes down to the almighty dollar. Those dollars are there. They're there. It's a very user-friendly system, this water quality trading and adaptive management both. For the participants involved, it's simple and easy. We've gone back to the days where these agreements are 5 pages. You know, 5 pages, and only one of those pages outlines what the landowner needs to do. But they're all very detailed and exact of what they know exactly what they need to do in terms of maintenance. It's a win-win situation for everybody involved in this situation. You've got a good economic return. I mentioned earlier where the landowner is getting paid, but they get to maintain those long-term management decisions. And that's extremely important for these landowners. John, I think you would agree. For an agricultural producer to have somebody come out and tell them what they need to be doing and how to do it, that don't work. Just doesn't work. Instead, if I'm out there asking them, hey, what can we do to improve your production? Yeah, okay, well, what if we also did this? And the next thing you know, we're in a conversation about improving water quality. And water quality never even comes up. The words never even come out of my mouth. But I walk away there knowing that I'm working with this individual, we've developed some trust, And that's really what it comes down to. It comes down to a locally led effort, which I'm a huge believer in. The less government interaction that is involved with a lot of this process, the better. I don't go out there and say, your PI is 6 and this and that, and we got to get you the law. NR 151 says this has got to happen. So with that said, instead, I'm talking with the city, say, Dave, I got these projects, got them lined up. They're pretty cool. Okay, he gives me the thumbs up. I send them off to Matt. Matt, got these projects. They're going to work out great. They look them over. Yeah, that's cool. Let's go. Back down to the local level. Now it's this landowner who doesn't necessarily recognize this whole process as a government-driven system. They're looking at it as a partnership between the city of Janesville and themselves. Nobody's dictating to them, and nobody's saying you have to do this. And in the end run, it works out very, very well. Okay, this is huge. This next stuff I'm going to talk about here. Nobody has yet mentioned that in order for the counties to implement NR 151, and that is our role, is to implement NR 151. In most cases, we have to make a bona fide cost share offer to that landowner to implement that practice. That's in the rules. That's in the state law. Mentioned before, the panel before here was perfect segue into this. We don't have that money. I mean, okay, we got 400 and some million coming from federal, whatever. Well, that's super, but how much of that am I going to see? How much of that is City of Janesville, Rock County going to see? So within the NR 151, we've got what we call priority farms. And I listed out there all the official classifications of what would make a priority farm. But simply said, and somebody said it earlier, 10 to 20% of the agricultural producers within a county are 80 to 90% of our problems of the phosphorus runoff. And so the classification, and for this discussion, priority farms. I don't go out there and tell the guy, hey, you're a priority for us, but I want to give you an example of a success here. Okay, example of priority farm. This is located in Rock County. The crop field in green, hopefully you can see that all right. All of that slopes down towards the drainage that's running north and south, up and down. And then the Yahara River is running just around the corner of the bend there. The pasture area is overgrade and is used as a seasonal feeding area. And this landowner has a history of not wanting to work with government agencies, okay? Stopped in one day, said, hey, I got a deal for you. This was after I drove by. This time of year, that's what that drainage looks like from the road. That's a snow melt off with about ½ inch of rain on it. And that's all going directly into the Yahara River. Again, for years, this guy didn't want to work with us. By the time we got done talking about the water quality trading program and adaptive management, we ended up seeding in the green area, the cropland. That's now in a 15-year agreement. He's getting paid for that, and then he also gets to harvest it. The area that was overgrazed in the pasture, he no longer has the cattle. So there's no more grazing in there. Okay, we got him to take that out of there. The history of not wanting to work with us, he is now calling me, mad at me, because I don't have him higher up on the list of projects to do. So, and this all happened within 2 to 3 years. So, this is it. This water quality trading and adaptive management, I believe is a huge, huge solution to everything we've talked about today. We need to keep working towards it. Thank you to Dave, John, Darrell, forgot Darrell. But I mean, these are, and Kim, EPA has been wonderful. I know they've really supported the Yahara Winds efforts and put them on the national scene. It's doable, and it's there. We just got to go get it. It's there. This water quality trading and adaptive management, in my mind, is the best tool that I've had to work with in my 25 plus years. And I've worked with all the government programs. And I can tell you some other things. In terms of the cost, overall costs, in the two particular plans that I worked with, they were less than the MDV costs per pound of phosphorus. I was able to accomplish in 2 years what it would have taken us to accomplish in 6 years with our normal funding sources. So it's an efficient, friendly user process that I'll close with that and say, go get it. Let's go get this.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate the panel, all of you. That was just a really interesting bit of the revelatory experiences that people on the ground have that those of us who imagine don't really, can't imagine without your help. I asked Anya earlier if she could put up again a slide that Eric Booth showed earlier. There you go. And so this is a slide that is showing phosphorus loss kind of on a stair-step system. And I'm just going to show, for those of you who can't see the details, I'm just going to say, and that includes the panel, I realize, so I'm going to read them out loud for your sake. So we're at 14.75 pounds per acre of phosphorus lost in corn and beans, traditional till. Then if you do no-till, that brings it dramatically down to the next bar over, you'll see, at 2.97 pounds of phosphorus lost. And then if you do no-till with some cover crops, 2.73 coming down. And then you're going to have to tell me what the distinction is there, Eric, for the last one. Grazed cover crops, thank you. Interseeded cover crops, thanks, brings it down to 0.55. And then if you see the managed grazing, it's down at 0.08 pounds. Just really, really cut down. So I'm wondering, this is my question, and I'm encouraging others to get yourselves primed. I see one person with a question ready, but just plan to come on up to the mic while I ask this. Feel free. How do you bring forward this degree of evolving? Science is always evolving, and as we get more data on which practices work for the water quality impacts, when they don't seem to work so terribly well necessarily with the farming systems of your farmers, how do you address that? How do you engage that kind of increased, ongoing knowledge and ongoing scientific input about what practices are going to have the greatest impact? How do you bring that into your two systems? Yes, please take a mic and answer that, all of you. I'm hoping I'll hear from all of you.
At the risk of offending you, I think you got it backwards. I think we have to ask the agricultural producers. And that's where you have to, the initial approach with these agricultural landowners is what works for you? What are your goals? If you start with those opening statements, you immediately have their attention. I'll open up with, hey, I've got something that might benefit your operation. And then when they start talking to you about what their management system is, then it's up to us to turn around and figure out how we can incorporate that technology and educate them or demonstrate to them what may work for them.
So how would you do that? I mean, I assume that too. I too work in a watershed group and I work with farmers, so I do understand the nature of that kind of conversation, and you're not coming in prescriptively. But how do you introduce this emerging science and the knowledge of which practices will have the greatest impact once you have the kind of trusting relationship you're suggesting?
Yeah, the easiest way to show them how they can make a profit.
Anybody else have a comment there you want to share on this?
I'll just mention an experience early on in our watershed program. We had a town meeting, and actually John presented some data from his own farm on how his use of clover both provided cover and also he was able to capture nitrogen credits and reduce his fertilizer usage, as well as, and this always stuck in my brain, that his no-till farming practices had dramatically reduced his diesel fuel purchases, to the point that his salesman, correct me if I'm wrong, and once said, well, when are you going to order more? And he's like, I'm good for this year. So that kind of statement out in front of a community is really significant. Now, curiously, I did hear a grumble from one person, kind of like, well, it worked on his farm and I don't know how to work on mine, you know, and that might just be one person's kind of defense mechanism for, well, I know what works on my farm. So it doesn't mean that it always flows through smoothly. Also, sometimes I will acknowledge this too, like we've been to conferences and received data, it was referenced earlier about like no-till not always, you know, providing higher dissolved reactive phosphorus flows, and particularly in winter snowmelt periods, that it's not just like one clear-cut answer. And so we'll have Farmers for Lake Country meetings over pizza, always got to have that, and then share actually some information that was gleaned from a recent conference. And then what do we do with that? How do we get nutrients further underground and so forth?
Thank you. So we have a question here. I hope others will start lining up. We have a panel. We want to hear your thoughts in response to the practical on-the-ground experiences of nutrient management trading, and then, the adaptive management system. So.
Thank you. Just real briefly, a little background, and then I'll get to kind of a big question for the policy people in the room. Rock River TMDL, I'm a project manager for that, southern Wisconsin. We were the guinea pig in the state. We were the first large-scale basin TMDL that DNR we developed in-house, and we were finalizing our water quality trading and adaptive management rule package at the time, and we were the guinea pigs testing these things out. And nobody knew how it would work. There was a lot of skepticism. We heard over and over again that farmers won't do anything, it's all the farmer's fault. I had worked previously with USDA, research scientists, worked in the public sector. I looked at the TMDL and my first question was, is this realistic? If I'm seeing a 60, 70, 80% reduction, is this even realistic? Is this achievable on the land? And I went out and I started meeting with the counties. I know a number of our county staff are here. They're the front lines, they're amazing, they're awesome. Chris, great job. Talking with them, where do you see, is this realistic? Can we even do this? How do we make this happen? Our wastewater staff, DNR wastewater staff, and anybody in training or adaptive management, raise your hands, please. We spent many nights and many weekends traveling around the Rock River Basin to every single community, talking with city councils and village boards about why they should consider training or adaptive management as a compliance option. Because many of them were saying, we're not going to do that, we don't trust farmers, et cetera, et cetera. We would explain the financial benefits. City councils turn over every 2 years, so you can have awesome superintendents. We saw one of the slides earlier, you have to have people at the city that really believe in it to make it happen. But if their council doesn't buy in, it's not going to move forward. So we met with Oconomowoc at city council meetings multiple times with counties, et cetera, to get that buy-in. And we've done that with many of our projects. I'm sad to say that more of our projects we've had cities walk away from. They've had farmer-led groups willing to participate. They've had farmer-led groups saying, we're willing to partner with you, and the cities have said, well, thanks, we'll walk away. I want to point out John Koepke. You're also a Leopold Conservation Farm Award winner, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
John was one of the first people I got to meet, instrumental in getting the Farmers for Lake Country going and helping get Dodge County farmers going. Reached out with farmers at Sugar River and Greene County. A number of other farmers have done that. The farmer-led groups have been instrumental in supporting these programs. And the programs by themselves would have struggled. But the farmers have been at the table pretty much since day one and forming the farmer-led groups. And most of the very successful projects that we have are partnered with a farmer-led group and usually with an agronomist. And that's the example that we've seen as an agency that has led to success. But like I said, sadly, we do have examples where communities probably should have done trading or adaptive management, but they chose to walk away, even though there was farmers there.
Great. Thank you for that additional, really interesting information and history.
So actually, to kind of follow up on that, I'm Sarah Wallen with the Alliance for the Great Lakes. So John, I have a question for you. We've known each other for a long time too, and you've always had this mentality well before it was cool. And I think what I see now is, I mean, we've seen extreme progress and ramping up acceleration through producer-led groups, which is amazing and hugely successful. However, how do we get more of you? I mean, you know, we need, what you mentioned is you need to have a catalyst. You need to have someone who is willing to stick their neck out among their peers in the local community to, you know, walk the walk. And I'm curious and concerned a bit that the weight of producer-led groups is such that they aren't going to have that kind of longevity as individuals to continue to beat the drum. So how can we, you know, incentivize more influencers like you on the landscape to keep doing that or grow new Johns?
I think my wife would like it if you grew a new one of me too. So that's a really, really good question, and I think it comes down to education, and it comes down to, like I showed the picture of the various people around the soil pit. It's getting those people to connect with one another, different age groups, different demographics within the community, et cetera, to get them to communicate with one another. I mean, I showed the old guy and the young guy standing next to one another. It very well could have been the traditional baby boomer versus millennial headbutting, but we really haven't seen that. And so I think that's a really good question, and it's getting to be harder and harder to answer as we become more divided about, you know, whether, I hate to use the word politically, but divided as a country and as a community, and whether it's city versus country or blue versus red or whatever. I mean, there's big challenges there, but I guess keep supporting the small groups. And with 2 kids in college right now studying agriculture, I think there has to be more of a focus there amongst the educational community. That one of my sons came home. He's a freshman at Fox Valley Tech, and he came home with a soils problem. As far as how to maintain a certain percent of cover on the field and do 2 tillage practices, and the field was highly erodible, and he had to figure out all the math. And I just told him there's a lot easier math, and it's not one of the options there. It's, you got to do no-till or pasture or something like that, and leave the chisel plow in the shed. And his response was, well, Dad, I'm not going to pass the class if I answer that. And so we need to get back to the educational community that this is important too, and that we don't just worry about NPK. I mean, that stuff's important. How to balance the checkbook's extremely important, but how to balance the farm rural community is also very, very important. And some of these questions and answers here, I think we all need more training in psychology than what any of us got, and not so much in environmental science.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I work in Southwest Wisconsin for Extension, and 3 of the 4 counties that I work in had this year significant MDV funds available. 3 of them left those funds on the table. In one case, over $100,000 they chose not to access. And I asked them, why are you not using those funds? And I got an earful. There's so many restrictions. Only a few farmers are gonna actually, be qualified to use them. We have to shop this around. We don't have enough staff to hunt down the farmers who are eligible, and then, there may be engineering contracts and all this other stuff. Too much work, we don't have the staff time. I'm wondering if you could compare, I think in particular, Chris, it sounds like you have experience with the trading funds versus MDV funds. Maybe compare the flexibility there, and is there something we can learn from that for other cost share programs that can make them more flexible and easier to use so that they're not left on the table?
Thank you for that question, Joe.
This is just going to be my experiences only. When we first were offered those types of funds, MDV funds, you summed it up pretty well. 9 key element plan had to be created. It's one of those things, and am I accurate with that, Matt? Did we have to do that?
You don't have to have one.
Don't have to have one?
You have to prioritize.
Okay, yeah. And so it wasn't a lot of money, and so that kind of got me thinking about this water quality trading plan, and I'd heard the city of Beloit had talked about doing something like that. So then when I contacted them about moving forward with something, and the same way with Dave, we discussed the different options. I mean, I felt that was my role, was to say, okay, here's the options that you have. And I don't know, Dave, it just seems to kind of lay itself out where water quality trading is, pretty straightforward, based on modeling. This is your phosphorus output. But there's a little more restrictions in the rules, and DNR's been fantastic with us in conversations and negotiating some of those types of things, allowing some flexibility. There's certainly more room for flexibility, which hopefully we can talk them into one of these days, which would really put us over the top and allow us to do some things. But I think, going back to that, the DMV just seemed like, you summarized it, the water quality trading, I could, in the perfect world, I can contact a landowner, educate them, have them agree to it, plan it, bring it back to Dave, get his approval on it, get the DNR's approval on it, and then design it, and then install it. I mean, if everything was just perfect, we could do that in 2 to 3 weeks. Some of these other processes, you're talking, shoot, it'll take you 2 to 3 weeks to fill out a grant application in some cases, So that's where I really believe this process is more efficient. And I don't know, Dave, do you have any thoughts on?
No, I agree with that. It just seemed relatively easy for our part, because Chris did all the work, and we got a great county guy that did this for us, so that really worked out well. But for him to basically do all the design, do all the legwork, and he just says, this is what it's going to cost. And I said, okay, we'll write the check. And so it worked out pretty well for us.
Great, thank you. Todd, I think you're up next.
So this has been great, and John, great to see you. I can attest to John's family's conservation ethic. I'm fairly old. I was on a couple of nonpoint committees with John's dad, so his family's been at this a long time. A couple of observations, having listened to this, and I was also around when the phosphorus rule went through. And I think we should take away there's some significant positives here, really from today. the first credit to where credit is due, Jim Bauman and Gordon Stevenson spent years developing the data to do the phosphorus rule, to be in a position to even propose it. And they kept moving forward with that in the Wisconsin DNR because they had support of an agency to actually do the work. And that's important. And so we got to this point where we were able to get the rule in place. It was not perfect, but it was certainly a step in the right direction. And here we are 15 years later, beginning to see some of the benefits. Now, everybody's frustrated with how long it's taken to get to this point and how much more we have to do. But a mentor of mine once said, if you're going to do public policy, you have to look at it in dog years. And that is to say that if you come up with a public policy idea and you are able to get some traction on the idea within 7 years, you are moving at lightning speed. And that's just the reality, folks. So we're beginning to see the fruits of those labors. Secondly, there's a lot of discussion about how do we incentivize doing more moving forward. I would suggest that we talk more about one of the significant public health problems associated with this, but then pivot to a very positive message. One of the things we haven't talked about here, so nationally about 10% of the households in the United States get their drinking water from private wells. In Wisconsin, that's 31%. And there's no regulations on private wells. There's none. There's rules on how you put them in, but after that, Safe Drinking Water Act doesn't apply, nothing applies. And everywhere where we've looked at the problems with drinking private wells in this state, 20 to 35% of those wells, the water is unsafe to drink. We have I would argue, a public health crisis in this state because of that. But I think we should turn that into a positive by talking about, look, we've got a big challenge to tackle, but this is Wisconsin. What we do on conservation issues is we lead. You go back to Coon Valley, shoreline zoning in the 1960s. We were the first ones to have secondary treatment of wastewater in the 1970s. We were the first ones to pass acid rain legislation. You go right up through. And so, yes, we still have significant problems. We have significant challenges ahead of us, but we've got a real crisis, and we need to now buckle down and do our part together to advance the ball further. And I think, some of these examples are perfect examples of things that we can be proud of and take pride in, but also motivate people. Because the last thing I'll say is that somebody once put it best. They said, when Martin Luther King in 1963 stood at the Lincoln Memorial, he had lots of reasons to be mad. He had lots of reasons to be angry. His speech wasn't called, "I have a complaint."
Well, Todd, you brought us home, and I must say, with impeccable timing. I've been getting my little high signs here, and you brought us in exactly on time. We have a very brief 5-minute break, but before we take it, I just want to point out the little funny blue QR codes on your table. And any further comments and questions you might want to make, this would be the perfect moment, and then we're really just going to literally be a 5-minute stretch break. So, zip out to the restroom if you must, zip back, but please be back here in 5. Thank you so much to our panel.
Thank you.